In the early 60s, Robert Plant was an aimless teenager growing up in Birmingham, England. He kind of drifted into the fading beat scene of that city.
I was at school and I was heading for a really boring academic career as a chartered accountant or something strange, and I ended up going to a folk club and hanging around with all these devious sort of a Kerouac. As I took off my school uniform and put on my blue jeans, this is the side of it that I heard that enticed me to pick up the harmonica, and I started playing harp before I started singing.
Mouth harp, that is.
Yeah.
Robert Plant began searching around for what, in America, were once called race records. He steeped himself in American blues history and folklore.
As soon as I got the essence of what intrigued me, it was an incessant search constantly to develop taste, because there was a lot of stuff that you could find. There were a lot of artists, apart from the more recent city blues men, the sort of Chicago chess people. There were people well before that who had Robert Johnson and Booker White and Skip James and Sleepy John Estes especially, who I really doted upon.
Even work for the poor. You don't try to rob nobody else. Bring a little dough, that's been our legs club. Boys, he really is my friend.
Sleepy John Estes came from a little tiny shack. He's virtually blind and whatnot, but he was able to write such fantastic lines. Like, there's a track called Lawyer Clark Blues that was written in 1928, where it's a typical 12-bar framework, but in the middle of it all, he says, this Lawyer Clark's so good, he's the only man who could prove water could run upstream, And this guy comes from the back of nowhere, and he's sitting on a corn sack, and he suddenly comes out with lines like that,
Boy, he really is my friend.
And how could this young man with a poetic and academic mind living in Birmingham, England, relate to the blues? Well, says Plant, most people have experienced in one way or another the emotions of the black singers he was listening to.
But I never heard anybody picture them and colour them and depict them so well before.
He tell him what to do.
In 1966, Robert Plant and John Bonham started a rock group called Band of Joy, playing everything from folk to rock to blues.
But we got no acceptance at all, did we? We just had to split up and give up,
We just get no work at all, People didn't want it.
There was nobody really who was about to sit down and give it a chance, because, it was still the days of a little less complicated music, The music was a little more simple.
Besides the Beatles, only two other British rock groups excited Robert Plant in those days.
We're talking about bands who were going out on their and staking their own claim to their own music, And I think really the Animals, the Yardbirds, were the ones who started it all here. We can't really say that Hermits led the way for us,
But while the Yardbirds and the Animals were creating a sensation in England and America, the Band of Joy were barely able to feed themselves. In fact, says Plant,
the guitarist had a transport cafe at the time, sort of a truck stop, so that it was good that we could, if we had a couple of, if we had about 50 cents with us, we could eat while we rehearsed, It was a good atmosphere, and we settled down immediately to taking, really, what John and I had been doing all the time in the Band of Joy, and what we'd had to give up financially because it was impossible to live. My old lady was keeping me, and John was working with Tim Rose, so we could return to what we wanted to play in the first place.
Robert Plant and John Bonham were able to return to the kind of music they wanted to play after Plant was, discovered by Jimmy Page of the Yardbirds. Page's group had just shattered, but he had concert commitments to fulfill in Europe.
So when we got together, there was a lot. I know John and I really wanted to just lay it down, like we've been trying to lay it down for a long time. But this time, somebody was going to pay us $10 a week to stick around.
In the beginning, they were simply called the New Yardbirds, but they would soon have a different name, Led Zeppelin, a name conceived by Keith Moon and John Entwistle, when they were thinking about leaving The Who. Robert Plant and John Bonham were two struggling Birmingham rock musicians in 1968, and they were losing their struggle. Enter Jimmy Page, formerly of the Yardbirds, hurriedly looking to form a new band. Plant and Bonham recall that they were flat broke when Page offered them a job. Says Plant,
Jimmy opened his lead wallet and off we went, We started rehearsing in a very small room, and we we used a few of the old Yardbirds numbers, didn't we, in the first place?
Well, we did a tour in Scandinavia as the Yardbirds, which Jimmy was under obligation.
Calling yourself the Yardbirds?
Well, he had to do it. It was a thing that was booked. When we first formed, we formed with Jimmy, and it was the new Yardbirds we were billed as then.
But Page and Plant wanted to lay the Yardbirds to rest. A new name for the group was needed. John Entwistle and Keith Moon tell the story that they simply became fed up with the aggressive behavior of Roger Daltrey and decided to break away from the Who and form a new group called Led Zeppelin. Entwistle claims that he mentioned the name to Jimmy Page and also discussed an idea for a cover design, a newsreel photograph of the Hindenburg Zeppelin going up in flames. Plant and Bonham have heard a different story.
Well, it was Mooney's idea for the name, but, it was obviously decided that they were too old to take the job, I don't know, what was it, John? I think it was Pie in the Sky, wasn't it?
It was an idea. I think actually it was Moon's idea more than anybody else's. From the story I got, was Moon thought of the name, but I know he thought the name up, and I think the lineup was going to be Moon and Jimmy were going to form a group.
Luckily, the Who patched up their differences. Luckily for Bonham, who nailed down the job of drummer in Led Zeppelin, a job that might have gone to Keith Moon. Although Plant insists that when he first agreed on a deal with Jimmy Page, he never heard any mention of the Who drummer.
Well, maybe the brandy was flying that night, But the thing is that Moon was never mentioned as far when I got with Jimmy. And he said, well, we really need a good drummer, And who else is... There's nobody as good as John, although he nearly tried to beat me up last night.
Almost overnight, Led Zeppelin became as big a sensation as the Yardbirds ever were. But when they finally got to America, rock critics tried to turn them into another Hindenburg. Robert Plant was a 19-year-old singer who had collected the records of American blues performers, had steeped himself in blues history, and had tried to perform his own version of the blues in a group called the Band of Joy, and also with the respected English folk rock musician Alexis Corner. But Plant was broke when he teamed up with Jimmy Page, formerly with the Yardbirds, and formed a group throwing television sets out of windows.
That it's a natural trait from critics,
In those early days of Led Zeppelin, the rock writers were depicting the members of the group as absolute lunatics.
Nothing's changed, man. Nothing's changed.
It was said that they destroyed hotel rooms, tossed television sets out of windows, dashed about, carrying on, scaring little old ladies.
The thing is, it's not a case... We weren't destructive or anything like that. It was just that there were occasions and scenes that really you couldn't help but have a good time. It wasn't a case of being loony or, I mean, everybody's thrown a TV out of the window.
Well, everybody, indeed. Just normal, everyday behavior. At least if you're a rock and roll star infected with a special sort of lunacy that grips most rock and roll stars. I mean, John Bonham, Led Zeppelin's drummer, was just a nice, quiet lad who looked more like a pipe fitter or a short order cook than a rock star before he hopped on the Zeppelin. And then his chums started busting up hotel rooms and throwing TVs out of windows. And John says...
To come from the sort of background we were in, and when we first came to America, I mean, I used to see things here, I just couldn't believe it. So I used to just go...
There'd be rowdy fights in posh restaurants, nude or semi-nude gambles with groupies around hotel swimming pools. Other rock groups marveled at the madness and decided to have a go at it themselves. But, says Plant, they were amateurs at rock and roll lunacy.
A lot of American musicians were sort of trying very hard to pull it off, but they just hadn't quite got the panache, So we showed them how to do it and then left. Or were asked to leave, one of the two, But the time sometimes arises now and again that you don't just start being crazy, I mean, you have a good time, and the good time escalates a little bit. You get a few English rock and rollers together, and so long as you don't do anybody any harm. I mean, the worst thing about it is that we got a reputation for being physical, and like unfair to other people, and that wasn't the case. It was always just plain fun, wasn't it?
Apologists for the Zeppelin and other madcap rock groups often note that long months on the road generally lead to aggressive behavior. But Robert Plant denies that any of his hijinks have been born out of aggression.
Good Lord above, man. I mean, this is California. It could be like Scottsbluff, Nebraska, but you're still going to have a good time if you can. You know, what are you going to do? Hang around and look cool all the time? You know, all those guys who walk around looking cool all the time sometimes forget how to smile.
But these days, the members of Led Zeppelin are behaving pretty cool themselves. Some sedate hotels even permit them to register there. Although John Bonham declares, half in jest,
carry some tents and trays and things if we ever get sort of evicted there.
But whatever happened to all the groupies who used to surround the Zeppelin?
You know, in our mid-20s, and you start... I mean, I don't know, you know. I mean, I like having a good time and laughing and all that, but I don't think any of us want a load of dimwits around us, you know, like dunderheads, you know what I mean?
And too many of the groupies who flocked around Zeppelin a few years ago were just that. Mindless kids whose flashy clothes and bizarre makeup often masked an otherwise dull, boring personality. Or so Robert Plant says today.
You see, there's a difference. There's the groupie, there's the person who enjoys rock and roll and wants to be around rock and rollers, and then there's the ones who flaunt themselves to such a degree that they lose all their own personal sort of, I don't know, pride and all that. And I hate to see that. It upsets me, you know, that people can, you know, come and be so, and lower themselves so much, you know. I'd rather be rid of it. And anyway, it looks like it's grown out. It looks like it's gone. Now we have a little bit of class, you know.
The people who come around you are just...
The people around us have class, we haven't. Yeah.
Remember, Robert Plant was barely out of his teens when he first toured America with Led Zeppelin. He was still able to identify closely with the teeny boppers who flocked around him, offering him bizarre fun and games.
The friends that we have developed more recently have been a little more staid, but have still, you know, had the ability to have a good time, you know.
And a good time is what rock and roll has always meant for Robert Plant and other members of Led Zeppelin. Other groups may become embroiled in countless personal hassles and seem on the edge of falling apart. But Led Zeppelin apparently have found a formula for remaining close friends as well as musical partners.
Nocturnal and like just sort of hovering from town to town and wobbling on stage and falling asleep in the middle of an interview. You know, if you want to enjoy it, then enjoy it. But if you start not to enjoy it to any point at all, get out before you destroy yourself, you know.
You get the feeling that Robert Plant doesn't take either himself or his music all that seriously. He seems to see himself only as an entertainer, providing a degree of pleasure for his audience and indirectly for himself. But he knows of other rock superstars who do feel weighted down by their reputations, plagued by the image fans and critics have created for them, and the image that they see in the mirror.
I mean, every man knows when he's kidding himself. It's how he tries to hide it that's, you know, that creates the sort of the downhill slide, you know. I mean, I've written a lot about that in lyrics, you know, that it's watching people around me. I mean, coming to a Hollywood show when we were about 20 and coming here now, there's a lot of, there's a lot of self-abuse going on, you know. You know, it's like maybe too much burning a candle or what it really is. But, like, if you...
Fourth, Robert Plant, the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, was motoring around the island of Rhodes in Greece, where he was vacationing with his wife and 2 children. There was a collision. Plant, his wife, and son were seriously injured, Plant suffering a crushed ankle and elbow. But an even greater anguish than the physical one for Plant was that which he felt over his own career.
I just didn't know whether I'd ever be able to do it again, you know. I mean, there was no telling whether I could or I couldn't. And more so, at the same time as having responsibility for my family as well and everything else, I also had a responsibility to John and Jimmy and Jonesy, you know. Because, like, every minute that I wasn't able to do anything, neither were they.
The other members of Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones, all received variations of the same news, that Plant and most of his family had been seriously injured in an auto accident. Peter Grant, the group's manager, got the word while he was vacationing in the French Riviera.
Yeah, Peter, our manager, flew back from the south of France. He got a plane on his own, flew straight through an electrical storm, and he doesn't like flying at all. He's really frightened of flying. And rushed back, left all his baggage at the airport in the south of France, rushed back to see me, got to the hospital. I'm lying there with my foot hanging off and everything. They come straight in, asked the doctor for 2 Valiums straight away, you know. He was in a complete state of shock, not only to see the fact that we got knocked about and yet we were still alive, but the fact that he'd just been through a terrible, like, trauma up in the air as well. Everybody sort of rallied round. Jimmy came very quickly. And at 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning, in my little room in the hospital, Pagey was so drunk that he nearly sat on my bad foot as he was moving a video machine around the room, you know.
That is a television set. Probably no English rock group has kept itself so solidly cemented by close friendship for as long as Led Zeppelin. While Robert Plant lay in his hospital room wondering whether he could continue as an invalid performer, his partners in rock and roll were working on his spirit, with spirits.
It was a very, very, very moving time for me, really, you know, because I didn't really know what the outcome was going to be for a while. But we battled on together. It was great, because we all came together and we all said, right, okay, you can't move, so we'll do an album. Sit in the wheelchair and sing.
Is that what happened?
Mm.
How do you feel about that?
I'm really pleased, you know. It's cool. Well, it meant that we kept on going and everybody rallied round rather than sort of going, oh, no, we were going to do a world tour. What on earth happened? It was like the family that it is. You know?
The members of Led Zeppelin have set a record of sorts. They have managed to stay together for 8 years without a hint of dissension among them, without a single member leaving the group to make a solo album or embark on a solo concert tour. Says the Zeppelin's drummer, John Bonham.
We have probably stayed together as 4 people from the beginning longer than anybody else has ever done. You know, even the Stones, you know.
Not that there haven't been reports in the rock press from time to time about plans for the Zeppelins' Jimmy Page or Robert Plant to record solo albums. But Plant insists that all of those reports were utter fabrications.
Unless I'm mistaken, when people say, why don't you do a solo album? The thing is, who else are you going to get to play with you? Who's going to get you off to bring out the best in you? There's nobody else who could do it for me, you know. I mean, a lot of people say, well, you know, you're a singer, can't you make a solo album? There's no point at all, you know, because I'd only have to come to John and Jonesy and Jimmy and say, will you play on my solo album? And that's really stupid, you know. For all the sort of coming and going and the ladies of pleasure and all that, the things that hang around rock and roll, the major thing is that the 3 hours or the 2...
That's the 2001. The object is black and twisted, obviously the worse for wear since its original appearance in 2001. To look at it on the pictures decorating the cover of the new Led Zeppelin album, it would seem that the object is now back in the year 1950 or thereabouts. Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin has contemplated the object, perceiving in it the messages that others might discover in the pyramids of Egypt, the crucifix of Christianity, or the NBCN.
The meaning behind it has been present throughout time, you know. Its purpose has been there from when time began. We just chose one time to illuminate its presence in society.
And that was the time when Robert Plant and the other members of Led Zeppelin were being born. That is not significant, says Plant.
It could have been any time at all, but we just chose that time as being a time to show it. It could have been the Middle Ages. It could have been next year, if you like. It'll always be with us.
Always be with Plant, maybe. The object may not be welcome anywhere else. It appeared recently in the home of Led Zeppelin's drummer, John Bonham.
While I was away, my wife received one of these on the table, and they had a tape machine running, and the children were singing, right? Mm. And this is the gospel truth. When they played the tape back, there was another sound on the tape. That's something to think about. So she put it outside the house. She won't have it in the house.
But the object apparently has a mind of its own. Why has it suddenly sat down in the middle of a rock and roll band? Why has it taken on the shape that it has, like a piece of licorice twist stuck on top of a Bible? Well, explains Plant,
to relate the intention that the object puts across, you know.
And what is that intention?
Well, you've got to work it out for yourself.
perhaps the object is